Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. In this episode, I interview Scott Leigh. Scott is the co-founder of AltFee, a software company helping law firms price alternative fee arrangements and hosts a directory of firms using alternative fees. Naturally, I made sure to add my law firm, Subscription Attorney LLC, to the directory. And I had to have Scott on the podcast since AltFee helps law firms move away from the billable hour. Thank you to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, links to both in the show notes and more on them later. You can sign up for the waitlist for my subscription seminar at subscriptionseminar.com. To those who have already signed up on the waitlist, you'll have more information about the upcoming seminar by the end of this month, June of 2023. Please share this podcast with someone you know who would be interested in it. And if you think this podcast earned the highest rating that your podcast app allows, please give it that rating to help others discover this show. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. Scott Leigh, co-founder and CEO of AltFee, welcome to Law Subscribed.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and for the conversation today.
Yeah. So go ahead and give yourself an introduction for my listeners.
Yeah. So I'm, as you mentioned, Scott Leigh, CEO and co-founder of AltFee. Prior to starting AltFee in 2020, I was a practicing attorney up in Canada and did that for 6 or so years before AltFee slowly transitioned into the full-time gig that it is now.
All right. So this was like a side hustle passion project then.
Yeah, it stemmed from real pain points. So I was practicing at my dad's firm here in Vancouver, who's been doing it for 40 years, most of that time through a partnership or on his own. And after, 10 or 11 years in the big firm life. So what happened for us was that pandemic was hitting. We were doing sort of 50 to 60% of the work at the firm using some type of alternative fee, non-hourly billing, just sort of naturally. But in my dad's head, it's sort of been nagging at him a little bit. Why don't we push this a little bit further over the last couple of years? And so as the pandemic hit, it was sort of the perfect reason to provide certainty for a client base that was entering these very uncertain times. And so he kind of made the decision, let's make this push. We all kind of looked around and said, this sounds great. Now, what do we go do to make sure we're successful under this model? And that was the start of us just figuring it out in a very manual way for the firm. So we spent 5 or 6 months building out a manual system that paid attention to breaking down the work we were doing on a project-to-project basis, paying attention to the data that was applying to each of those, and then encouraging the team members to continuously learn as they went through that process. And so we went through this thing 5 or 6 months. He rolled it out under its own branding at his firm, but we got deeply exposed to the world of non-hourly pricing and became obsessed with how we can help people do what we started to see the benefits of very quickly at my dad's firm, was be successful under this model. And that was sort of the start of the idea of AltFee in late summer of 2020.
Mm-hmm. So something I picked out of that is that when you started to focus more on the alternative fee arrangements, that you were really making efforts to track everything that you could. And one of the benefits and one of the pushback that I've gotten from the legacy model attorneys, as I like to call them, is, well, at least with the billable hour, we know everything we're spending our time doing. And it's not meant to, and abandoning the billable hour isn't meant for you to stop knowing how you're spending your time. But since you're no longer billing your time or tracking it, if you're all in on alternative fee arrangements, what were some of the things that your firm was doing? And then as you went and launched AltFee and you saw what some other firms were doing, you want to talk a little bit more about those tools or methodologies.
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum of, even on the alternative fee providing spectrum of, still recording time, using that as the primary metric that you pay attention to when you create your costs and the fees that you provide, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, really pure value based, don't record time, don't really even use that as a consideration. And so I think there's a big spectrum there, and I've seen people all over it. Now, as you transition, it's from the hourly traditional model and mindset, it's often easier to wrap your mind around that focus around time costs and allowing that to set benchmarks maybe of, at a minimum, this may be an acceptable amount for our firm at a minimum, but allow us to grow from there. So I approach conversations trying to understand where people may sit in that spectrum, where they're looking to get to, and then approach it in a way where, not just our software, but philosophically around this transition, that you can continue to push in the direction that you want. maybe by starting with a focus around what this maybe historically would have cost with a time focus, but incorporate some of those value-based concepts as you work your way in. Think about how urgent this project is for your client. Think about, the amount of money that's on the line for your client in this project, and start to piece these things into your thinking around it. And you can find yourself wherever you want in that spectrum over time.
Right. And while I would like to encourage listeners to move closer to the value-based pricing perspective of that, even not necessarily just focused on what's the most amount I could charge for the value that I'm providing, but also the more efficient your practice is, what's the type of scale that you could have to take on more clients maybe, right?
Yeah.
And so, with that comes the virtuous incentive cycle of, well, now that I'm not billing my time, I'm incentivized to adopt technology that helps me be a more productive and efficient attorney. So, can you talk a little bit about that experience of moving away from the billable hour and what effect that had on your firm, and then also how that relates to your work with AltFee?
Yeah, one of my favorite concepts to chat to people who are either trying to figure it out, interested, wherever they are, is, especially nowadays, over the last couple of years, we as in the legal industry and law firms have really started to adopt technologies that increase efficiencies of billable work, traditionally billable work. Whereas historically, a lot of the technology we were adopting, although it was slow and it was happening a little bit here and there, it was primarily around administrative, non-billable work. And so I always pose the question of, if you're adopting technology that's e-discovery, that's document automation, that's doing these things that's really increasing efficiency around your billable work, what are you doing to properly capitalize under that model so that, if a job used to take you 10 hours, now takes you an hour, if the value's at 10 hours of whatever your hourly rate is, well, you got to reanalyze or rethink your model in order to align the value you're delivering as a service provider with the fees that you're charging. So it's a really interesting conversation to have that I pose as people are thinking about this, especially over the last year, 2 years, whatever it is, which I try and do and find quite fascinating to kind of spur the thinking a little bit in a different direction.
Yeah. And so, and I actually like that hypothetical. So let's take that hypothetical. Let's say you draft a document. It used to take you 10 hours, and just for simple math, let's say, it's $100 an hour. So now you're making, $1,000, but now you could do it in 1 hour. But you don't want to only make $100, but the value is the 10. So you could just charge $1,000 for that piece of work, or what you can do is you could charge even, and this is maybe being radical, but you could charge less than that. Let's say half the price, $500. But now what you could do is you could represent 10 clients on that same document within those 10 hours. And what you've actually done is you significantly increased what your take home is. So now you're increasing accessibility, potentially increasing your access of pool of clients who could afford your services, and increasing your revenue, even though you've in a way reduced your client's cost by 50%. Is that, how does that sound to you? Am I speaking nonsense here, or have you seen things like that?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think we're in a place now where people can kind of reanalyze their traditional mindset around these things, and that's a very fair way to look at an opportunity that's in front of you, right? Here's a set of factors. Here's how I can analyze it, and here's a possible outcome of this. I also see people that say, maybe I'm interested in working less, and so I want to charge the $1,000 that I used to charge, but do it on the 1 hour, because in my mind and in conversation with my client, I'm delivering the same amount of value that I would have doing it 10 hours, but I can do it in an hour. And so if we're aligned in that, and we can have that great conversation up front, understand the scope of this project, and agree upon that fee, then I'm in a great position as the provider to efficiently go carry that project out. Because what I love having conversations and hearing people talk about in our industry, which you didn't hear of very much in past years, was this idea of efficiency. Like I get to care about efficiency in my law firm, where historically, of course, under the billable model, you're not incentivized to be efficient. Whereas now you can actually, if you're alternative fee pricing in any way, you can start to get excited about that and truly build systems that allow you to do a good job of allocating your resources and be efficient in carrying out, hopefully at the same level or better level, whatever it is, of that deliverable at the end of the day.
Right. And that brings up some other good points for things that I wasn't even necessarily planning to talking with you about, which is like the mental health of attorneys, right? About the work-life balance that attorneys who are billing their time don't have, the burnout, the stress, all those issues, the 4-day work week, which you can't do if you're billing by the hour, right? Otherwise, you're giving up significant potential revenue streams. These now all become possible. If you wanted to just replace the value for the time and make it equal, you could really do that as long as you could get your clients on board.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the really exciting things about this space and what's kind of got me deep in it is that there's true potential to have a win-win-win outcome out of this. So we look at the major stakeholders, we look at, the consumers of legal services, the clients of the firms, we look at the legal professionals that work there, and we look at the law firm. And so each of those parties under this model, if done well, can win. And I think, from the legal professional side, certainly the mental health is very well known to be poor within our industry. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, yes, we work long hours, but that also stems from the fact that our value as service providers are just almost exclusively tied to how much time we can put into it, not necessarily the skill that goes into it all the time, but how much time you put into it. And so that's draining as an individual for sure.
Yeah. So, this is making me think about the big firm model. It's almost necessary that it's disrupted by this kind of thing, right? Because it works because it's a pyramid, where, the ones who earn the most are billing the less because the associates are billing more time, beneath them, and the partners and management are taking a higher fee. That seems clear to me. Is that sort of a natural outcome of alternative fee arrangements being adopted to you as well? Why or why not?
Yeah, it's the billable hour is so ingrained, especially in big firms model in terms of compensation and everything that goes into it, that it's really hard to untangle that. What I think is starting to happen more and more, which we'll find out in a few years from now, I guess, is that it's coming from a couple of different angles. So one, maybe most importantly in terms of actual change, is that clients are speaking up. And I'm not just talking, the individual that's getting the will done or a real estate transaction completed, but big corporations are now creating internal mandates about the level of alternative fees that they're requesting or required to have from their external counsel that they're working with. And so I'm starting to hear a bit of that become quite real for big firms as well. So I think when the big corporations that have the leverage and the power start to make that not just a request, but a demand, the law firms have to start reacting in quite a significant way. And so I think I'm seeing aspects of that start to happen. And then on the flip side of that, the big firm model works well when you have the associates that are coming in, working hard, filling up the bottom of sort of the pyramid that's there. But what I'm seeing happen, and I don't have any data to support this happening more than it already did, but I'm seeing quite a bit of even people in and around my era, people I went to law school with and all that they're not accepting of the status quo in the same way that maybe previous generations were. And so they're looking to take a different action. And that action could be starting my own firm or joining some fellow associates that are all 5-year calls that are leaving to go put a partnership together and kind of do it our way. Or just not going to fall. Like the partner dream of big firm isn't the same as it was for the person that was here 10 years before me, and I'm going to find a different way to earn a living within this industry or outside of this industry for a lot of people. And so I think there's real retention challenges that I see happening right now that affect the big firms as well.
Yeah. Retention is one of my selling points when I try to sell alternative fees in the subscription model. Is do you want attorneys working for you? If you want to hire, you want to have you want to be more competitive, then make it so they don't have to bill their time. And you'll start hiring a lot faster. I think something a thread I want to pull on that you mentioned, which I wasn't thinking about at the time of preparing for the interview, but since you mentioned it, there's something about our generation, because we graduated law school at the same time in 2014. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I mean, maybe there's just something about our generation or at least the proliferation of information and other business model opportunities that's out there that simply wasn't accessible to attorneys before. Even though business law is not taught, like the business of law, I should say, is not taught in law school, we now have access to those resources. People like Carolyn Elephant and Bob Ambrogi, who have been publishing about all the different ways of using the legal tech or how to be a solo attorney. Those resources are greater than ever before. Oh. And so I think part of it's a lot of that, or it's just something unique about our particular graduating class, plus or minus 3 years.
Yeah, it's probably a combination of all that is my guess, right? Is we're certainly in a different place. Like the idea that you can set up a fully remote subscription only model law firm, whether it's yourself and others, like with, I put in quotations, with relative ease, like
Mhm.
nothing's easy, but compared to setting up a physical office and everything that went into even that, is we're just in it's a different time, right? So I think it maybe opens people's minds up to this being a real opportunity. And as you said, there's also resources, a lot of resources to support what I may be going through and how I can go do a good job of this. But I think you're right. Like, I mean, I'm also an example of it. I had the best possible private practice experience I could ask for working at my dad's firm, doing the type of work that I wanted, taking part on the management side of the business. But still, it's a difficult business to grow under the traditional hourly model. And so I got excited about the world that I'm in now, and help kind of push in that direction. But a lot of it was, this is a hard industry to grow in historically, because you're really just adding more people or getting your people to work more time. And that's not a very sustainable business model for the long term, right?
Right. And, speaking of resources available to law students and attorneys, that brings us to altfeeco.com, link in the show notes. You have the website, you have the law firm directory. And so already your directory is making my life easier with this podcast, because I could just go
Uh,
on there, click the fee type of firm, see subscriptions, and see that there's over a dozen law firms of now, which I'm proud to say my law firm subscription attorney is also on there. And I have more guests for my podcast. But in addition to that, let's talk about AltFee. Tell me more, like, what is AltFee? Tell the listeners, what is it? What is its goal? What is it trying to accomplish? And I'll let you take it from there.
yeah, sounds great. I'll speak to the directory quickly because that's awesome to hear. It's exactly what we envisioned, right? When we started this thing, in addition to building AltFee, the business around this, from the perspective of, we wanted to build community tied to this concept of non-hourly pricing. And part of that is just getting to know other people that are doing this, sharing stories, sharing success stories, sharing challenges, and how you overcame them. And this is our initiative that we started to kick off this year, was building a directory of alternative fee providing firms. And so it's really intended to be a space for exactly what you're doing. It's intended to be a spot where you can see what other firms are doing out there. What approaches are they taking? If you're obviously, from a referral perspective, if you're a client looking for services from a firm somewhere around you, and you want to go get away from the traditional hourly model, then here's an opportunity to go learn a little bit more about those firms and touch base with them through there. So it's really intended to be a central resource for all those major stakeholders that I talked about before. So it's awesome to hear that you've already started to benefit from it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. But now let's talk about the
yeah.
business side of it. Like, how does it make money?
Yeah. So what we do have we have a piece of software underlying this. So what we did with AltFee was we experienced that 5 or 6 months at my dad's firm of building this thing out manually. We learned a ton about where we saw opportunity. Things were going great, but where could technology really supplement what was going on? And that's where we focused our efforts. So we've now got AltFee software commercially available that's out there that helps law firms with the scoping and pricing of their work. So we allow firms to break down their work into individual projects, or take a phase-based approach for some of the more sophisticated, less predictable, more complex work, where you can really scope and price each individual aspect of that work at a time. So it has full flexibility and customization to take the approach on that, where you live on that spectrum. So if you want to pay attention mostly to inputs, what I would call inputs, sort of what do we need to do as a law firm, as a lawyer, you can do that. We call them factors. You pay attention to those factors. It acts like a checklist to really help facilitate that upfront conversation, so that you can be very accurate with the scoping of that work, and then use that to obviously agree upon fees. And we also allow and encourage firms to use the structure that we've created around our guidelines, what we call guidelines or pricing guidelines, to take into consideration value-based factors as well, where it fits. So really, our set of factors can work in a way where these are all the things you should be thinking about or talking to the client about upfront, in order to understand what you're getting yourself into on this project, and then agree upon those fees. And our tool as a whole, our goal with the tool, is to kind of give you the different aspects that you need in order for yourself and the rest of your team members to share knowledge, collaborate, and scope and price with accuracy and with confidence at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a really interesting offering, and I because this is a show about subscriptions, even though this isn't legal services on a subscription for your model, you've opted to go with the subscription model. So let's talk about that. Why the subscription model?
Yeah, you know what? It makes the most sense for kind of the space that we're living in. This was never a let's build software and sit back and see what happens. This was we continually iterate, right? And that's kind of the fun part is I get to have conversations with our customer base, with potential customers, and really dig and try and understand the challenges that they're facing, maybe where AltFee's killing it and maybe where there's room for improvement. And so we're continually updating this thing based on what we're hearing in a direction that we feel is aligned with the needs that are out there from this group of people that this is a fit with.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. And a clarification question is it only a software product, or is it like a software plus a consulting part of it too? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, it's just software. So what you'll see on our pricing page, which is transparent, we do talk about sort of the strategic coaching element, and that's wrapped into our onboarding. So we spend a bunch of time up front when a new customer comes on, getting them set up for success. Obviously, that's our goal as a business, as a software company, but also philosophically to help people do this successfully. So we invest a bunch of time up front in getting them set up for success by helping them build out guidelines tied to the specific work that they're doing, tap into our large database of template guidelines, and then, sort of get them set up so that these guidelines they can stand behind with confidence and start to use to scope and price the real client matters from within the software, and kind of tee it up for them and their organization to push forward in a really positive direction. So it's the coaching, if you will, is kind of wrapped into our onboarding as part of the setup for success model.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because that's exactly what I was asking about, because I'm looking at your pricing page right now.
Right.
So another thing I see, and this is something I talk about, and on my own website for Subscription Attorney, my firm, I don't ever show more than 3 options at a time, right? So you have 3 tiers. Why 3?
Yeah, well, it was strategic in terms of trying to find the right breadth of possibilities for different groups, and it's a learning curve. So we came out of the start when our software was actually almost about a year ago exactly, at a very different stage, and we spent a lot of time kind of in the fall of last year really getting the structure of the relationship with our customers kind of dialed in, and it was just based on learnings. It was based on the experiences we've had to date. It was based on our target market and who we thought this was a right fit for. And we tailored a lot of the aspects of how the structure with our customer base is set up. And you see that reflected now in the pricing page on our website.
Yeah, and target market, learning as you go. I mean, these are things that attorneys don't always think about, because they're just like, well, I'll just bill X amount per hour and just we'll see what happens, right? So these are I'm really glad you're walking us through the thought process and the learning process, because that's part of what this is, right? And of course, if the attorney is on their own, or if the firm is on their own, AltFee is a place they could go to help them walk them through this process. This conversation is really just surface level. When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database, since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSubscribed at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney, or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form at scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSubscribed at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show. Something else that I saw that you chose to do, which I haven't seen yet, and I haven't seen in a lot of other consumer spaces, is going from a higher price to a lower price as you go up the tier. So from tier 1 to 2 to 3. And I can't understand why you would want to do that, right? Tier 1 service, biggest firm, biggest opportunity. But that is sort of the reverse of, and maybe that's just a US thing, and you're in Canada and maybe things are different there. But I wonder what was the reasoning behind that specific choice to start at tier one at the highest price.
Yeah, it was. It's not just U.S. or Canada. You don't see it very often, but it was strategic in terms of just it's sort of getting perspective and aligning. Obviously, our all of us naturally reading left to right and starting to get an idea for what we can do, right? And we know as a piece of software and as a business that people may find the right fit off the start, but our model largely is based on land and expand in terms of you can start with a smaller group, but what a resource is becomes really valuable for is groups of people who are willing to share knowledge, excited to collaborate. That picks up the amount of value you can get out of our product. So it's sort of just sharing this spectrum of wherever you can fit. It's not just about the number of people at your firm. It can be how active you are with the software. All those things are applicable. So just sort of making sure that people can see the breadth of what could work within the software.
And then okay, and then another thing that comes to mind when I'm looking at this is it looks like you are targeting like larger firms, like mid-size and larger firms with this offering, right? If you're talking about 200 licensed users and 100 different priced client matters, I mean, because those I'm assuming would be like different types of clients with different types of matters, right? So, you're going to get that the bigger the firm that you have. So is that part of your target market as you are looking at helping disrupt the billable hour and big law?
Yeah, we're having conversations with the bigger firms, and when we launched, it was interesting because they're interested and aware of the space. My belief obviously tied to the client demand that's starting to happen. So there's interest, but it's a large and difficult decision for those really big firms to just flip the switch. And so one of the ways that we approach it in a way that allows them to start to get exposure to it is we can really work well as a piece of software in a group. So in a smaller group, we can really let people get experience using this pricing model, using the software to help that pricing model be successful in smaller groups and allow it to sort of grow internally. So it's the way that our conversations are living from the, call it mid to large firms. It's more that direction versus the firm, that maybe has 5 people, 25 people, where you might have the one person at the top that says, this is the shift we're making and we're all going to get on board for this. So yeah, it's tailored to the fit that's out there. There's slightly different ways you can take it that can still work really well within those groups or for the firm as a whole. But the conversations will kind of run its course depending on the needs that are in front of us. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad we connected in that Slack group because I get some people reaching out to me, some attorneys who are like, "Oh, like let's talk. Like I want to pick your brain on the subscription model," and I'm like, "Well, I'm a practicing attorney. I don't have time for that. That's what the podcast is for." And so, like, I have had some coaches on here that help attorneys with business development, just getting into a good mindset, integrating technology. But this is even sort of another element, which is like let's model out a bunch of different alternative fee arrangements and see what works for your practice, right? And so like this would be if those attorneys call me now, I could say listen to the AltFee episode with Scott Leigh and learn more there, right? Is that am I appreciating what AltFee does?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think the goal behind this thing is let's be the foundational tool to allow people to be successful using alternative fees, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're set out to do that, that's obviously there's multiple directions in which that needs to all come together in order to hit home. And we've built relationships and building relationships with the pricing consultants of the world who are providing the strategic coaching and advice around these things. But we're a piece of software that helps do that across your team with consistency and with confidence. So yeah, as you said, that's the space we live in.
Yeah, and so let's talk about some definitional things. So like the company's called AltFee, as in alternative fee, but alternative to what? I mean, we've sort of been implying it, but I'll let you say it.
Yeah, well, the maybe most widely accepted definition is alternative fee arrangements, right? Which you'll see many different definitions around. The one that we care about is the one that is providing services that are non-hourly with a common characteristic of providing cost certainty up front. That's not everyone's definition. That's the definition that we really like because that cost certainty piece takes alternative fees to another level where lots of people would consider variation. I would call them variations, tweaks to the billable hour as still alternative fees. those to me still really kind of live under the billable hour spectrum. So
Mhm.
that's how I would define it in a way that we're excited about.
Yeah, that's great. And if you're just listening to the audio, Scott just said that from memory. He's not reading anything, that definition. So obviously lives and breathes it. I also want to include in that though that like contingency, right? Because
Yeah.
it's also not transparent what the fee is going to be with contingency because you don't know what you're going to win. And you don't know how much of the liens you're going to have to pay back, depending on what the settlement or award is at trial, right? So, like even the contingency fee
Mm,
is very opaque in the personal injury space, right? And so, I think there's room for innovation in that space too. For let's, maybe charge a flat amount per month as your case is ongoing. Maybe you pay for some of the costs and then we take a lesser percentage, So, like, there's like a way, I feel like there's a way to innovate even in that space. And for some people, they can't afford anything and the true contingency model works for that,
yeah.
right? But I think there's a lot of room for innovation there. So I would just also
Yeah.
like to lump contingency in with billable hour as a more traditional fee that we need alternatives to in some form or another.
Yeah, I think I don't claim to be a personal injury expert in it by any means. I come from a corporate business background, but I think your point's valid, and that's that there's some of the most fun conversations you can have if you sit long enough digging into the challenge and the space and the type of services someone's providing. I can give you the name of 6 common types of alternative fees, but any combination and variation of these things that work for the client that's in front of you, how you're structured as a firm, and the needs that are sitting there is awesome. Like I know that's not the easiest way to approach every single client conversation, but if you can start to create consistency around these variations of approaches, and the one that you just mentioned is I've seen firms do that in different types of work, like even like M&A transactions where you might take a monthly fee for the duration of this project, but you don't know how long this is going to last, and you're trying to sell your company, and you may take a success fee upon the completion of the transaction. That's really exciting because we're kind of whatever the monthly fee is enough to keep the lights on kind of thing, but we're all aligning our interest to get to that end goal together of let's sell this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a win for everyone involved in this. So yeah, I think part of it is don't be stuck in our industry and our ways of thinking. It's really encouraging and exciting to look outside of our industry and look at how M&A firms are pricing their work. Look at how real estate agents are pricing their work, and just allow the creativity to kind of run a little bit, because they all can be the right fit at the right time if that's what the client needs and what makes sense for your firm, right?
Right, right. I've definitely done those types of commercial transactions where it's a monthly fee with a
Yeah.
success fee. And so there's an incentive to get the deal done as opposed to just let it keep going so you keep getting your monthly fee, right? So I think aligning incentives between the attorney and the client is super important in that instance. Some other questions I have about AltFee go back to like this definitional thing that you talked about, where you're getting away from the billable hour. So implicit in what AltFee does, are they coming in and like the firms that you're serving, are they firms that are trying to get away from the billable hour or like interested in it? Or are you also serving any firms that they're just starting and they want to just look at what fees can we use that's not the billable hour?
Yeah, it is a range. So you do get people all over the mix. So I think what the model for success to help people build confidence under this is that almost every firm, I think stats say like 84% of firms offer some type of alternative fee. So most people are doing some type of flat fee or fixed fee already as the basic level. And so I really encourage people to go all in on that to start, right? Let's go all in on the stuff you're already doing alternative fees on. Let's, if they're coming on alt fee, let's get in the system. Let's build guidelines around these. Let's look at the historical data. Let's get really comfortable with this, because that's going to give you ultra confidence that every time this project comes up, you're going to be going into alt fee, you're going to be scoping and pricing, and you're just going to get better and better every time you do this by encouraging your team to learn, get those learnings back in here. Let's get better and better. So I often start the conversation that way, no matter where they sit on the spectrum to start with. A lot of the firms that are coming on are probably living in I do a little bit of this and I want to do more of this, and I want to do more of it better. And so that's really just the starting spot of, okay, let's focus on the stuff you're doing this under. That's the easiest way to wrap our minds around this. Now, the next level of conversation is, okay, let's explore what other areas you're excited to grow in or you see as potentially really good fits around, fixed fees, phase-based approach, whatever, and then start the conversations there, because that's when, if you start to build these guidelines or AltFee pricing guidelines tied to these pieces of work, then you think about things in a different way as an individual, but also as a firm. Assuming we have a few people at this firm at the minimum, let's say, then one of the challenges that we saw early was a lack of confidence. I think human beings, just generally, we undervalue ourselves. But when we're pricing our legal services in a way that maybe the industry is not as comfortable with, we're typically going to lack confidence in it. And so what we're trying to do with using the sort of the guideline-driven approach that we take is build a bunch of confidence, whether it's managing partner, associate, paralegal, whoever it is that's using this tool, build a bunch of confidence, because I can now see all the factors that my law firm considers relevant for this project type. I can see historical data of how we've priced this type of work within AltFee in the past, and a bunch of shared knowledge from our team and experience tied to that, to give me the confidence that I'm going to need to go do it really well. And so we're sort of just building towards that by the guideline driven approach and the knowledge sharing that happens from each of those individual projects.
Yeah. And I also see here on your pricing page that you integrate with Clio. So it makes it so if you're using Clio, it's sort of easier to track that kind of thing. But I've also seen some Clio data that has shown like that a lot of solos use Clio. So like, what are you do you have like a unlisted offering for like true solo attorneys, or like how are you, if a solo attorney came to you, they don't need 5 licensed users, like how do you handle that type of user?
Yeah. So the number of users that are included at the tier 3 level gives breadth to bring on whoever might fit at your firm if you're within that size. But our focus as an organization is helping all levels of people be successful under this model. From the pure business side, it's harder to allow this to be a good revenue producing model for us, because we invest so much upfront in our strategic coaching and onboarding, that it's harder if one individual is coming on. Now, with that said, I have a lot of conversations with solos or people in, let's say the 2 to 5 range team members. And I'm always excited to talk to people that are passionate and want to make change in this direction. I'm confident that we'll be able to find an arrangement that works with them in those situations. But primarily, I describe ourselves as a knowledge sharing and collaboration tool. With multiple team members on, you get the value of that knowledge sharing and collaboration in a way that you don't necessarily as a solo. So all that to say, I'm always excited to talk to people that are passionate and want to chat about alternative fees, and happy to explore where the fit might be with the actual software as well.
Yeah, and talk about like a virtuous cycle, right? Because the more data you collect from more firms using your software, the more you're able to project and iterate on all the models, right? And so like it's almost like the more users you have, the greater value you're providing to every one of your users, right?
Right.
And then another thought that comes to mind is like incubators. So I think the American Bar Association has like one of their websites, which is impossible to find on the website, but if you search like ABA incubators, they'll list all these states' incubator programs for attorneys who want to, say, start a solo or small practice with an access to justice angle, and they almost all preach some kind of alternative billing. Are you looking at, or have you worked with any of these incubators?
Yeah, I wouldn't say directly with the incubators, but we're certainly in conversations with, whether it's pro bono organizations or those sorts of organizations that this is a focus of theirs. There's a lot of alignment there, obviously, in terms of exactly what you said. When you read how they speak about the challenges that they're approaching and the people they're trying to bring within their incubators or other programs, a lot of it is tied to the accessibility challenges, and then tying that obviously to the pricing model, which is one of the major aspects which creates the accessibility, access to justice challenge that we have going on in our industry. So yeah, we have some relationships going for sure, but definitely excited to continue those and start to find where the overlap sits to be able to access that group of people that, adding a tool to their mix would be a valuable add-on for them for sure.
And sort of in that vein of question, I also have a selfish question about my own law firm, which is Subscription Attorney. Have you seen any other prices that get as low as $20 a month out there from law firms? Because I was a guest on another podcast, and the title of that podcast, he called it Becoming America's Most Affordable Attorney. And I do not claim to be that, because I don't have the data to back it up. But with a website like AltFee, and since you're behind it, I was wondering, what are some of the most accessible alternative fees that you've seen, and am I up there?
You're definitely up there, if not at the very top from everything I've seen. I'll speak to one really cool organization that I've got to know locally here in British Columbia over the last year or so. It's called Everyone Legal Clinic, and they're doing something really cool that is worth checking out for anyone that's interested. What they've done, they've comboed a lot of challenges into one really interesting initiative. So what they've done is they've created essentially a law firm, but they've done that in a way where they have supervising lawyers across British Columbia who are working with articling students, and they've done it in a way where these articling students come in. I can't remember the exact number. I think this is the first year they've done this, and they're 5 months into it, maybe, or something like that. I think there's maybe 20, let's say, articling students.
Well, hold on, I just have to get a clarification point. This could be a jurisdictional thing. When you say articling,
yeah.
what do you mean?
Freshly out of law school, not a called lawyer. So your first year outside of law school. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Clerk,
we don't use that terminology in the US, but we have those types of lawyers too. So yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what they've done is they've matched up these articling students fresh out of law school, and they've comboed that with supervising lawyers, and they've set up this structure that's really cool where they're providing really affordable legal services through this combination of experienced supervising lawyers and articling students working together to deliver on these various project types. So it's a really interesting approach they've taken, which I continue to follow and be excited about on a number of fronts, but is worth checking out for some innovation, maybe more broadly, to the Access to Justice challenge.
Well, I look forward to getting introduced to them directly by you so I could have somebody from there on the podcast. So, and that's really interesting. It brings me back to, I think I maybe said that was going to be my last question, but now you made me think of another one. And that is, I had a guest on a long time ago on the podcast who suggested that there is an opportunity for a government-funded version of attorneys get paid X amount per month to serve Y amount of clients, and some basic legal ways to create, although he didn't phrase it this way, essentially a civil right to an attorney.
Oh, interesting.
And so I wonder if, and that's kind of like really extrapolating the subscription model, and that was from a non-lawyer, right? And so leave it to someone who's not steeped in the dogma of legal services to come up with a cool idea like that. And it's super complicated about how you would effectuate that kind of a thing. Would you have to raise, tax revenue? Like, how would you do that? But this Everyone Legal Clinic sort of sounds like a nonprofit approach to that, while also credentialing young attorneys at the same time. Does that sound right?
I think maybe loosely, yeah. I'm probably not in the position to say exactly yes or no in terms of their approach, but I think broadly we're talking about giving access to justice to more people, in whether it's through pro bono, whether it's through reduced cost services. For me, a lot of this stems from the idea that there is ways we can provide cost certainty for people up front, so at least they can make real decisions around, should I spend X amount of dollars to get this project? Are my pain points that I need help with significant enough where I should spend this clear amount of money that I can know up front? Then at least we're in a position to make good decisions as individuals, as businesses. So a lot of this seems to be stepping in the right direction, which is really, really positive for, obviously the access to justice challenges, but more broadly, I think, just for the industry.
So other than telling an attorney, go to altfeeco.com, if somebody were to approach you who's a lawyer, or you had a chance to talk to them, and they just are so stuck in their way of, I just want to bill by the hour, what do you say to convince them that they need to offer an alternative fee?
Well, it probably depends where they're at, but I think, where we started this conversation of just having an understanding of, the aspects of their practice that they're creating efficiencies in. How are you handling that from your business model at the highest level? What are you doing in your business model to ensure that you're able to capitalize on the efficiencies that you're creating in your business? And I think some people are okay with how things are going, and they're going to settle in there for a while, for forever, or for as long as they can. But I think if someone's taking a bit of a futuristic, modern, maybe even a few years out thinking around it, they realize that there's incredible opportunity both from the business side of it, but also just from as we've talked about, the personal side of it, growth opportunities that can really live in and around this. And if those pique interest, then I think conversation's worthy to think about how are you going to do that under the billable hour versus how are you going to do that under the use of alternative fees. And that's often a nice place to get a conversation going.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. I love it. For my last question, you're actually the second Canadian I've asked this to, so I'm curious to see what your answer is. And that is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
Is a hot dog a sandwich? No, it's not. I think the thinking behind this has to be around the type of meat that's in the middle of it. Because if you're just saying bread on the bottom and bread on the top equals sandwich, we're talking hamburgers, talking hot dogs. I don't think those can live in the sandwich category. You just can't do it.
Calzone,
Yeah.
Is kind
Oh yeah, that's getting crazy. That's getting really crazy. Yeah, we got it. That just confirms it's a hard no. Can't be.
All right. Well, Scott Leigh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Law Subscribed. If any of the listeners want to follow up with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, our website, altfeeco.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Scott Leigh, last name Leigh. But yeah, I'm around, able to connect, use LinkedIn as a starting spot, and I'd love to have conversations.
All right. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for sponsoring this show. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with someone you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email Kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.